Welcome to today's conversation. My name is Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblett, and I am the chief curator of the core exhibition at Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. And it is my pleasure to moderate today's conversation. The occasion is the theatrical release of Still Life in Lodz, an extraordinary feature documentary about a return to Poland prompted by a painting. Today, we'll have the opportunity to talk with those most closely connected with the film and with the city of Lodz, once a thriving industrial metropolis, the Manchester of Poland, thanks to its textile industry, and also a very diverse city with its Polish, German, and its Jewish population. But first, a word about the film. The lure of family mysteries lies at the heart of Still Life in Lodz, an emotionally riveting documentary that journeys through the historically tumultuous city of Lodz, Poland. Here, a surprise discovery, a reunion with a painting that hung in the same apartment for 75 years, becomes a probing investigation into the power of memory, art, time, and resilience. What follows is a deeply personal detective story, rich with twists and turns, but equally, it is an ode to the lost generations of Jewish Lodz and a look at how fragile, but also how incredibly necessary our relationship with the past is for recreating the future. And now for the trailer.
I remember when we left the apartment for the last time, that the apartment was completely empty, but the largest mark was left on the wall where the painting hung. On my journey to tell this story, I will be accompanied by Paul Celler, who lives in New York City, and by Ronnie Ben-Ari, who lives in Israel. The past and family histories bind the three of us to the city of Lodz. The still life painting is my own object of memory. I definitely can feel the connection to this room. Yes, this is the room. This is my home. When the Germans invaded Poland and annexed Łódź to Reich, Łódź became Litzmannstadt. Most of the Łódź Jews, about 250,000 at that time, were herded into a Jewish ghetto.
Mom, you survived. It was a miracle. A true miracle.
This menorah belonged to this home and come with emotion and memories of my childhood with them together.
Przypuszczam, że ta kategoria Żydów wcześniej lub później opuści nasz kraj.
The occasion for our conversation today is the theatrical release of Still Life in Lodz. And this extraordinary feature documentary about a return to Poland is, as you could see from that short trailer, it is prompted by a painting. And so I'd like to begin our conversation, which is really a conversation with two of the three individuals whose personal stories are interwoven in this extraordinary film. Our conversation will culminate with Lodz's native son, Daniel Libeskind, who is being honored by the city as Person of the Year. And we look very, very much forward to talking with Daniel at towards the end of our conversation. But first, let me introduce Lilka Elbaum. Lilka was born in Lodz to Holocaust survivors, and in 1968, as a result of a brutal government-sponsored anti-Semitic campaign, she, like so many other Polish Jews, she and her family left Poland for Canada, and later she moved to the greater Boston area, where she works at Boston University's Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies. So Lilka, I want to ask you maybe the most obvious question, and that is, the inspiration for this film begins with a chance encounter. Could you describe that encounter?
Yes, thank you, Barbara, and hello, everyone. This is very interesting. I've been to Poland hundreds of times since Poland transformed itself. And I never really went to Łódź that much. I spent all my time in Warsaw, which always, associated, it was associated with my life in Łódź. And it's a pretty ugly city, although changing, as we speak. But in 2016, I went for a special occasion. And this is important because it's related to my family history. This was the wedding of the great-granddaughter of the righteous family who saved my mother during the war. So I made a special trip to Łódź to attend the wedding. And while in Łódź, I also reconnected with my former childhood friend, daughter of the man who, when we had to leave Poland, purchased all the content of the apartment. And she said to me, come, I show you the painting. And I wasn't even like saying, what painting? And then I realized it was the painting, the one which hung above my bed, my day bed or night bed, when I lived in the apartment. So we went to see the painting, which hangs in her country home. And I was just really emotionally gutted by the encounter. That's how I encountered the painting.
Well, things also have biographies, and Jewish things in post-war Poland are often orphan objects, forever severed from their owners. They become, quote, post-Jewish things, but that's not what happened here. So please tell us, how did this painting, an object of memory, lead to a much bigger story and eventually a film?
Well, essentially, Poland was once the third largest Jewish city in the world. And what remains today, it's very, in terms of the objects, the buildings, the architecture, and I'm sure also a lot of objects which are inside those buildings, it really, truly, a lot of it belonged to the Jews. Now, I was totally disinterested in the building. The building was already pretty dilapidated, I think, when we lived there. It was built in 1893, but I really didn't spend any time trying to understand why we had this amazing furniture and this painting when my parents were really not native to Łódź. They moved to Łódź, like most Jews, after the war, because there was still infrastructure in Łódź as it wasn't in Warsaw and other cities. But then I recall that my father said, there were strange objects with German names in the apartment. And I asked my father once, and my father said, we have it because a German dentist lived here, a German dentist. So in my own mind, I immediately saw a very civilized German dentist kind of helping everybody during the war. And then my parents come in, they are Jews, and they conduct this transaction, and he packs his bag and he leaves the apartment, and my parents become owners of absolutely everything, including towels, including sculptures, including paintings and furniture. And this is how I really remember it. And the interesting story is here, when I hooked up with Sławek, we kind of built it into the scenario that there was a German dentist who lived in Łódź. And Łódź had about 15% of German ethnic population before the war. I even asked people, was he like a settler or perhaps a native Łódź lodger, inhabitant? Well, interestingly enough, we were incredibly lucky to uncover the real story of the building inhabitants. And here I have to, give thanks to Professor Monika Kutzner from University of Łódź, who heads the German department. So, Germany and history of German, Łódź is her forte. And she was able to find out. And here, this is what's very interesting. This doesn't come from ancestry or my heritage. It comes from German tax records. Nazis kept very detailed tax records throughout the war, which they actually assessed tax to people who were already murdered or they were about to be murdered. And we found lists of the inhabitants of the building with very detailed information, how much rent they paid, who lived where, and how many people, how many rooms. And that's we found out that actually who lived in my apartment, number 16, was a Jewish dentist, but she was a woman. It was a Jewish woman dentist. And then, as we probed deeper and deeper, we found the identity of this Jewish dentist. And then we found out that indeed, during the war years, when she had to go to the ghetto, there was a German Volksdeutsch, which means somebody who took on German, identity, who was a very simple, very simple worker, a blue-collar worker who moved from a Franciszkańska street, which is kind of a slums of Łódź, where the ghetto later was, and he was able to live there for 4 years, and then he had to leave, and we moved in, but the painting always remained on the wall.
This is absolutely astonishing. As a curator, the idea of the point of entry to these stories, and they're all intertwined, should be through an object, through furnishings, through a physical building, and through memories. Well, in a way, the building becomes a memory palace, and the way in which memory, in a way, is attached to places, to a space, an empty space on the wall, to the painting, and to much else that was in those rooms. It's a very, I think what the film really demonstrates is how rich this material culture of the past, the material traces that remain, can be as entry points for getting to this wider story. So with that, thank you very, very much, Lilka. With that, I would like to turn now to Paul Celler. And Paul was born in New Jersey to Polish-born Holocaust survivors. His mother and father have two very different and equally compelling stories. His mother was a prisoner in the Łódź ghetto and then in Auschwitz and at a slave labor camp in Germany. This film is dedicated to Paul's parents, Rosa Pozalska and David Celler. And so, Paul, I wanted to ask you, how did you become involved in this project?
I want to say thank you and good morning to everybody. I became involved in this project as a result of coincidence. Lilka and we have a mutual friend of ours. Her name is Bonnie Ann Fang. She's from Livingston, New Jersey, which is where I previously lived as well. And Bonnie's family were survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto. So Bonnie knew Lilka, she knew me, and she also knew that I was also son of Holocaust survivors. And she thought that it would be a good idea that I'd meet Lilka. And so what we did, I ended up touching base with Lilka. We reached out and we had conversations initially. And I was amazed by some of the records that she had. That she had like a 1939 phone book from Łódź. Unbelievable. And that got me very curious as to where exactly my mom and her family lived. So what we did, we arranged to meet in a hotel over in Manhattan City, I believe, in New York. And she encouraged me to bring any artifacts that I had from the war, post-war. I brought all kinds of things. I brought pictures of my mom's family, my dad's family, my mom's naturalization papers from coming to the United States. Same thing with my dad. And I brought everything I could. And we sat down and we went over things. And it was a no-brainer for me to get involved in this film because as a young child, even, I grew up hearing all about the Holocaust. I heard stories randomly from my mother. She didn't like to talk about it too much, but she would come out and speak randomly. I remember this, I remember that. My dad really told me amazing stories. And I just grew up with this information. And for me to get involved here with a film was just, it was an opportunity that I couldn't let go by. And I felt I had an obligation to tell my mom, my dad's story, both because every generation moving forward needs to know what happened here because this is something that should never happen again to any religion, race, creed on earth. Because unfortunately, during war times, the worst comes out in people, and sometimes the best comes out in people as well. You had people who turned against us. You had people who were very brave that also saved us and hid us. A time when it was very dangerous, and it was just an amazing time. And I feel I had an obligation that I had to tell my mom's story and be involved in this film. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to be part of this.
Well, it's fascinating for me that the intertwining of the three stories really reflect very, very different, I would say, relationships to the city and to its history, so that you are the child of Holocaust survivors born and raised in the US, and Lilka is the child of Holocaust survivors, but she was born and raised in post-war Poland. And so those are very complementary and at the same time quite different stories. But also what I love about this film is that it's a combination of digging into archives, including a family archive, like the materials that you brought, as well as the research that was done by Lilka and in support of Sławek. And there were many surprises along the way, many twists and turns, because if you will, the film did not begin with a known outcome, that the outcome came in the process of making the film. So my question to you is, what did you discover in the process of making the film? What did you find out that you didn't know in the process of making the film?
Well, I learned a little bit more about the actual city of Lodz. I had been to Poland once previously, about 10 years before, on a trip with my son's yeshiva. And Lodz was one of the places that we did go to. And but from this particular film, just learned a lot more about the intricacies of the city, everything. And it was a lot more intensive.
And how would you describe the difference in your experience of the city between your first visit and this visit?
The first visit was very broad. We went to certain places in the city. We went to the cemetery. We went to the Radegast station. But this was a little bit more intensive. Walking around through the ghetto. Also had the opportunity to go to the palace where I played the piano there. And that was a very special experience for me.
I
And
bet.
yeah, and it was just, it was much more intensive.
But it was
And
broader. It was more than the Holocaust.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was just not just the Holocaust. It was just the experience of being involved in a film and everything. Never
This was
dreamed
the
of doing
this was
something like this before.
right. So this was your first experience making a film.
Absolutely.
Oh
Yeah.
my word. That is really exciting. I wonder, I know that your mother was, as you said, but I knew from before that your mother was more reluctant to talk about her Holocaust experiences, which of course are the ones that were directly connected to Łódź, to Lodz, but that your father was much more forthcoming. And I wondered if you might say something about his story.
Yes. My father was born in an area of government Poland known as Celts. And my father was born uh, to, uh, to a tailor. All right. My father's father was a poor man. Okay. My father's mother was more of a religious lady. And my father had three brothers. And he grew up in Celt. He was born in 1924. So therefore, he was 15 years old when the war broke out. And the thing that was amazing, my father did not look like a Jew. My father had blonde hair and blue eyes. And his blonde hair and blue eyes probably saved him in a lot of ways. One of the ways that it did save him, when he was in the Celts ghetto, uh, my father's father was in the infirmary and he died of colon cancer. And before that occurred, there was an SS officer that was in the ghetto that was fascinated by this young Aryan-looking Jew. And my father did all kinds of little errands for him, would go out and get him cigarettes, would shine his boots for him every day. He took a liking to my dad. And so my father had a little bit of an advantage there. And then what happened, my father's father died. And my father went and posed a question that would be unheard of. He said to the SS officer, please, my father passed away in the hospital. Please, let me take him out in the field and bury him. The SS officer looked at him like he was crazy. My father said, please. And the SS officer looked both ways, make sure no one was looking. And he said, weitermachen, go. He gave my father the opportunity to do that. It was unheard of thing to be able to go and take anybody, no less a father, and give him a funeral. My father wrapped him up in white sheets and everything, took him out and buried him.
That's
And
extraordinary.
and because of that, I made very sure that on my father's monument, not only did it say that he was a great father, great husband, grandfather, he was also a great son.
Absolutely phenomenal. And I know that his is a much longer and richer story, and I hope at some point we'll get to hear much more of it. But now I would like to turn to our filmmaker, to Slawomir Grunberg, and I'd like to introduce Sławek. Sławek is a graduate of the renowned Polish Film School in Łódź, and he's an Emmy Award winner and director, producer, and cinematographer of 45 documentary films. Now, he left Poland in 1981, and since then he has been living in the United States, and more recently in Mexico. He continues to direct and produce films in his native Poland, pardon me, and in other countries. Now, of course, Sław, you were the logical person to make this film. It's not your first, it's not your last, about the connection between Jews who left Poland and Poland today. From your film about the Peresniks, about the Jewish school in Łódź, which Lilka and her brother attended, to the film that you made about my father returning to his hometown of Opatów. And what a joy it was to work with you on that film. So I can imagine Lilka and Paul, how gratifying it was to have Sławik as your filmmaker. Now, what I've always loved about your films is your restraint as a filmmaker and your ability to make a wonderful film, but that really brings your subjects forward rather than the filmmaker. And this, I think, is one of the most endearing, for me, one of the most endearing qualities about your work. And of course, you have your own connection to Łódź, as I've already said, because that's where you went to film school. So I wanted to ask you, how did you first envision the film? In other words, what happened from your very first ideas for the film to the film that ultimately evolved?
Well, thank you, Barbara, for such an amazing, wonderful introduction, and thanks for organizing this webinar, everybody who are behind this, and thanks Lilka, Paul, and Daniel for participating in it. I met also Daniel as part of the Perecznik documentary. He also was in the last Jewish school in Łódź, so we met almost 15 years ago. We were much younger at that time, on the set of different Łódź documentary. So when Lilka approached me with the idea, I really found it fascinating, because telling a story through the painting is so unusual. And the painting, which hang in the same apartment, a tenement apartment for 75 years, that's a challenge. Then the next challenge is how to tell the story, having not only Lilka, but also Paul and Ronnie. Ronnie is not here, but she's our third character in the film. How to connect them together so the story is clear and it's not all over the screen. So the idea was to use animation. The animation which I used successfully in my previous film, Karski and the Lords of Humanity. So this way, through the animation, I was able to connect three different stories and telling the film more than just talking heads and historical archives. Bring the film elements of art, which makes it different. I think this is what makes this film different from other films I did, is that you have this combination of art, archival footage, animation, and rephotography, which is another form of visual effects. So,
well, it is, I think, challenging for all those reasons, weaving together three very different stories. And especially, I think, Lilka's, which is at the center, is somebody born and raised and who stayed in Poland a very long time after the war, whereas the other two heroes of this story have very, very different life experiences, and of course the various media, and of course something very striking, which is the music. How did you make that decision?
Yeah, this is also part of the whole big picture, is to compose the music to the completed film. I never done this before. That the film is ready, the film is locked. You have a composer and orchestra who is actually playing the music, two visuals. This is how it is done in feature films, very rarely in documentary format. So this was my first time, and I think it was successful. I hope people like the music in this film. So the music is another element which adds poetry, which adds art to this sometimes provocative film about power of roots, about special objects, role of memory, and how they inform each other. So I hope the music work. I'm very happy we were working with the composer and musicians who did the film, and all of them were from Łódź. You know, the editor and musicians were from city of Łódź.
Well, you know, it's fascinating also for those of us who have been working with you and following your work over the last, I would say, certainly 15 or 20 years, is how you've evolved as a filmmaker. And the experiment, in a way, the experimental, an increasingly experimental approach to documentary filmmaking, which I think is really fascinating. And your willingness to take risks, because I know that I think you felt it very acutely when making the Karski film, but probably here also, and that is that there are certain risks in the mixing of animation. Oh, we know that animation can be used in films that take on very serious subjects, so that's a given. That there's nothing about animation that, because we associate it with children's cartoons, there's nothing about it that is, if you will, trivializing. It's been used to incredible effect with extremely difficult subjects. But nonetheless, it is, if you will, your approach to the music, your approach to animation, they are also risky. But how would you describe the, if you will, the risks of those kinds of experiments?
I mean, risk is part of any creation. You know, I did over 45 documentaries, and when someone look at them and try to analyze, there could be 5 different Slawomir Grunbergs within the last 40 years, because my work changed so much from the cinema verite approach, where my camera was on the shoulder and I was recording everything like a fly on the wall, to this film which brings a lot of art in it, a lot of experimentation, a lot of special effects. So I think, you know, I like to take a risk. It's part of my life story, if you will. I've done it not only in the film, but in real life. And I enjoy this risk.
Well, I think we do too, actually. And I think the contrast between the film that you made with my father, which I think was around 2007, or maybe a little bit later, but quite a long time ago, and this film, but it seems particularly appropriate for this film, given that its starting point is a painting, which is a wonderful, wonderful starting point. So now, well, thank you very much, Slawik. Now I'd like very much to turn to the culmination of our panel and to our very distinguished panelist, Daniel Libeskind. And I would like to introduce Daniel, who needs no introduction, an internationally acclaimed architect, urban designer, and educator. And Daniel was born in Łódź to Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors, to Dora Blaustein and Nachman Libeskind. And in 1957, the Libeskinds left Łódź for Israel. And then in 1959, they moved to the United States. Daniel is renowned for his ability to evoke cultural memory in buildings, and is currently working on a major project in Łódź that he's going to tell us about, where in his honor, 2021 was proclaimed the Daniel Libeskind Year. Now, I just want to make a personal comment, because I am a great fan of Daniel Libeskind and his architecture. And I happen to love the building that you created for the Jewish Museum Berlin. I saw it just after it was completed. I believe I was even at your birthday party around then. I remember it very vividly. I think it's a marvelous building. But also, I was recently at the Mo Museum in Vilnius in Lithuania. That is a fabulous building, and it is so perfect for that museum. I really, you know, following your work and seeing what you did when you had a monumental building, that is to say, for a very large and very, very ambitious museum, and then what you did for a very small, brand new museum in Vilnius. And it reminds me somewhat of the project that you're developing for the Center for Architecture in Łódź, because it's also on a main thoroughfare. and it's also sort of smaller in scale. But in any event, what I'd like to do, though, is to invite you to say something about how you feel about the city of Łódź claiming its native son in a full embrace as they declare this the Daniel Libeskind year.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me thank everybody, saying good evening, dobry wieczór, to all the listeners here, and to congratulate this group, Slawomir Lilka Paul, for a wonderful, fascinating film. Which, you know, wherever you're born, that's your destiny. You know, I was born in Łódź, and I wouldn't agree with Lilka when she said it was an ugly city, because there is something remarkable about Łódź. My father was from Łódź. He was born in Łódź, to very poor, you know, Jewish, family. He was very poor all his life, and he continued to be very modest, even after he was a survivor in America. But Łódź to him was a paradise. He loved Łódź and probably inculcated my sister and myself with the love for Łódź, because we used to walk in the 50s as children through the streets of Łódź, and he would point out various buildings, various places, not just in Jewish culture, but in the city itself. So what can I say? How lucky I am to be back in Łódź. You know, I never thought when we left, because we left, you know, the government was a communist government. It hounded the Jews. We were actually, when we left to Israel, that was a kind of expulsion of the Jews. Our passports were taken away. It was the only place we could go to. But coming back to Łódź, in a new Poland, a Poland that has freedom, a Poland that is really the dark skies have lifted. I'm so happy and so thrilled every time I come to Łódź, to Poland, to see young people, to see the energy, to see the fact that Łódź is a city of the future. Of course, it's dilapidated. There has been no investment in it. But to me, it's a city that is a remarkable, beautiful city that deserves the attention. And how lucky am I to be actually building a building there?
Which I think is absolutely phenomenal. So before we turn to the building, because I'd like us to have the opportunity to do that, I just wanted to ask you, when you saw the film, where in the story the film tells could you find yourself?
Everywhere. The minute I saw Lilka in that apartment, the minute I saw the building, the minute so that was our life. That was, that was what we understood. We understood those buildings. We understood the incredible Jewish population of the city in hundreds of thousands. When we were walking to streets that there was no Jews left in that city. So that film was very close to my heart. It really touched many emotions as the film developed the story, and a remarkable story of the fact that Polish people saved her parents. That was kind of fantastic. There was something uplifting, because in such a darkness, to find something uplifting, as Paul said, to find something of humanity, of the good, is a remarkable experience. And so I really saw myself in many ways in this film. And I thought often, what would have happened if I had been born earlier? Would I even be here? Would I be here to speak about this city? If I was just slightly older, what would have happened to me? If my parents were not lucky enough to have escaped, and of course gotten into Russian prison camps in Siberia, what if they had not escaped? That what would have happened is to what happened to my father's family and to my mother's family. They were all exterminated. 85 people, the immediate family. Out of the 4 siblings, only 1 sibling of my father survived. My mother's family, almost nobody. So it's a story of resilience. It's a story of the future. It's a story of the fact that you should never forget, because the past guides us to the future. And we have to understand the past, as difficult as it is for a younger generation who are lucky enough never to experience these horrors, to understand the history of that city. And as you said, I think very remarkably, material objects. Most people think, oh, material objects, what is it? It's just material objects, it's Karl Marx and all that stuff. No, material objects are really the conveyors of memory. When we don't remember, the objects remember for us. And so the film is beautiful about the painting.
Yep, they are vessels of memory. They really are. I mean, that's one of the most, for me, particularly where I work and where I come from, the idea that there's an object at the center of it and how ingeniously the film, and of course, Lilka and the other protagonists in the film are able to, almost, it's like Ariadne's thread, you know, they just start pulling on this thread of the object and to mix a metaphor, and then this whole story unfolds. Well, Daniel, we'd love to see the building that you have designed and to hear about the Center for Architecture. If you might first tell us, what is this Center for Architecture and how is it that it came about? And then the building that you are planning for it.
Well, there was a friend, there was a people in Łódź who care about their city, who want the city to not just be left behind, but to say that this is a city which is a fantastic city. So a center of architecture, and I'm prepared to donate many of my drawings and models and ideas, but it's really for people to understand that the architecture of Łódź is really a key to the development of its history, the fact that the city was so attractive over history, the fact that it changed when the textile industry sort of died, but that the city has a future. So this is an idea for a cultural building, really just a few blocks from where I lived, on Piotrkowska. My sister went to school in Jaracza. I went to school in Wschodnia. So it's a neighborhood I know so well. I know every building, I know those windows, I know those stones, and how lucky for me to be able to design a building that will really open itself for many activities to people. It will invite people, not the architects, and not just people interested in architecture, but people who love Łódź, who love the city, who love the idea of the fact that history goes on, and we have to do better than just rest on the past. So yes, you see the visualization of the building, and I hope that it will garner the possibility of being built. One thing to be able to draw something, to plan it, but the will to build it. And I think building is always a sign of optimism. If you build a building, you really assert that the city is here, is the future. The city is not just the past. And that to me is the greatest act of faith. Whether you're a Jew or a Christian, or whoever you are, the fact of building means you're rooting something in the soil of the place. And how much I love that, because I do love Łódź. Even in its state that in many ways is not really taken care of, like Warsaw and other cities where I've worked, city will come back. There's no doubt about it. And I think the city, this building is a proof of the fact of its future.
I couldn't agree more. And Łódź is making a comeback. They have developed a very, very interesting state-of-the-art film museum that is intended to be a combination of museum and also laboratory workshop. And it's a major operation. And it is speaking also to the legacy of Łódź as a filmmaking capital of Poland and a major film incubator in Europe. So I think so. And the other is that I would say that to take care of a city, you have to love the city. To love the city, you have to know something about it. And its architecture, its fabric, which is not just buildings, but it's rather part of the urban design of the entire city. It's not just one building after another. It's part of a gestalt, of a whole. But also, I really love the way, and this reminds me of Mo Museum in Vilnius. I love the way that this building is sitting within this street. It's very, I think, well, I don't have to tell you how difficult it is to incorporate a contemporary building into an historical facade.
Absolutely, it's a historical street. I attempted to really weave the city fabric and its scale to a building that will fit in, but also say something new to the city, and yet follow that history. And I'm a great lover of Raymond's great book, The
Promised Land.
And Viola's film, where you can see how much the fabric of the city is part of people's emotions. And I think this is really, I have to say, right now I'm in Berlin, where I'm sitting from, but I think Łódź has a kind of toughness and a kind of beauty that will become appreciated, and it suddenly, you know, will burst into a flower. There's no doubt in my mind that it has all the capacity and all the energy. And I think Lilka's, words in that film, all the things that we see which are abandoned, wow, they come back to life. And to me, that is a testament to Łódź. And look, when I lived in Łódź, we had many, my parents mostly had Polish friends. There were hardly Jews left. And my mother's first language, she preferred to speak Polish than Yiddish. She started speaking more Yiddish when she was in New York. So, and my father was a true patriot of Poland. Even after the Holocaust, he was proud that he served in the Polish army, that was his country. He never accepted the fact that there was something wrong with Poland or with Łódź. He obliterated the communists and the Germans. He thought, Łódź is my city. It's a city that I love. It's a city that I appreciate forever. So there is something eternal to the connections of people's place. Nobody chooses where they're born, Nobody says, I want to be born here, I want to be, you're just born. And that's kind of your destiny. And how lucky for me that I have rediscovered Łódź when I came back in such a different way, without the ambivalence I had when I was growing, on the communist anti-Semitism and hatred. And how wonderful it is that the world does change, and it's often in better ways.
Well, actually, and what you're doing is, in fact, I think, creating a catalyst for the urban renewal of the city, which is extraordinary, and to do it through architecture, which is to heighten awareness of architecture as an agent in the city's life, its history, and its future, I think is enormously, enormously important. So with that, well, thank you very much, Daniel. What I'd like to do now, I think we have a few moments to open up to questions, if there are any, and if not, I would like to encourage a little bit of discussion among ourselves. So let me turn now to the Q&A and see what we have. And so let me, there's a number, one simple question. Łódź versus Lodz. So Łódź is the Polish pronunciation. Lodz is how we would say it in Yiddish and in English. And now we have a question here. Were the descendants of the woman dentist interested in any of the contents of the apartment? And what about this particular painting? So Lilka.
Thank you, Barbara. Very interestingly, after the film was already completed and in the can, so to speak, we were able to find out, because in the film, we say very clearly that all of the people who lived there, which is the Jewish dentist, her name was Paula Ehrlich, and her two sons, Felix and Michał, that we felt, and we, based on the information we had at the time, they perished. But then, after the film was completed and already shown in Łódź, Professor Kutzner discovered that the two sons actually survived the war, and they lived in Łódź until '56, and like you, Daniel, then immigrated to Israel in the first wave of post-war immigration. Now, I have been in touch with them. I reached out to them, and we now totally, in contact, we correspond. I don't know if any of them is with us today, but I send them all the information. And interesting enough, they would like to get the painting back. Actually, I would like to get the painting back. So after I saw the painting, and I know the people who owned it, they are friends. They were friends of my parents. So I definitely know them. This is not like a restitution case. We were friends, they purchased, there was a transaction, I want to make clear. But when I saw the painting, I immediately wanted to buy it, but it was not an option. But now we have an interesting case where the descendants want to buy it. And we don't know what's going to happen. You know, we are trying to negotiate because, you know, as the ultimate kind of a, you know, conclusion to my involvement in this movie, I am planning to show the film in the courtyard of the building at Kilińskiego 41 in August of 2021. It will be part of the commemorations for the Łódź ghetto liquidation, which always happen, you know, 25th of August, 25th, 26th. And the developers, the people who own the building at the moment, which is empty, awaiting reconstruction or renovation, they were very excited about it. And we felt that all the descendants, because there's 25 descendants of the woman dentist who live in United States, and they live in Israel, wonderful family with many generations. They were all gonna come to Łódź. There's also a descendant of somebody who lived in the building, who lives in France. He was gonna come, so we were all gonna come, and then they will be handed over the painting. You know, it would be wonderful. And unfortunately, for many reasons, one of them being pandemic, and the other one, unfortunately, the painting, it might not happen, but the movie still might be shown. It's a complicated issue because essentially the family who owns the painting felt that the painting has been with them now for 43 years, whatever, and they are very attached to it.
Well, at least they're taking good care of it and that they care about it. I mean, and that they did actually purchase it. But nonetheless, what a scenario if it were possible to have the reunion that you were describing. A couple of technical questions. Yes, there will be a recording of this panel, of this conversation, and it will be available to anyone who would like to see it. I believe that the link for it will be posted and sent also to everybody who registered for today. And the film has been theatrically released as of the 12th of March, and we'll be providing that information at the end of our conversation. Essentially, if you will go to stilllifeinlodz.com, you will find all the information you need for where you'll be able to see the film. And then there is a question here, and that is from Ellen Brodsky. If Daniel and Lilka could speak to their experience of feeling whether they were Polish Jews or Jewish Poles when they were growing up. So let me start with that, and then I have a question from Ellen for Paul. So Daniel, do you want to start?
Well, you know, I've always felt that I was Polish. I happen to be Jewish, but you know, I grew up in Poland. I speak the language. I read Polish books. I admired Polish history. I was lucky to see the Polish landscapes and love Polish music. Who doesn't like Chopin or Szymanowski and so on, and Mickiewicz? You know, it's kind of in my blood. And now, of course, I'm Jewish. I don't know how to divide those two identities. I don't think they are two. They are just a single identity. How can I separate one from the other? It's just impossible.
Lilka?
Well, yeah, I know Ellen Brodsky. Hello. Basically, I had many identity crises in my life, but never about who I am as a Polish Jew. So in other words, I was always Jewish in Poland, openly. I went to a Jewish school. My name was Rosenbaum, which is like pretty obvious, you know, for those who know Jews, that I was not an ethnic Pole. And essentially, I was also very attached to the Polish culture. So I was a Polish Jew. I don't know a Polish Jew or a Jewish Pole, but those two identities, the same as with Daniel, who was born like me in Łódź, they are like melded together, you know? And when I said I went to a Jewish school, my very good friend, Rabbi Polak, hello, Rabbi, you know, we have this discussion that apparently the school wasn't Jewish because it didn't really teach, you know, Jewish like Jewish history, the way Torah is. And yeah, that's probably true. But in the Poland of 1950s and 60s, it was a huge departure because we had Yiddish as a language and also Yiddish history in a kind of a not religious way, but we were very Jewish, and I totally never had a problem saying it's melded and both. It was never an issue for me.
So listen,
you can't divide the body from the soul.
Yes,
you can't
exactly.
separate them. They're together, and that's the enigma of being a human being. So I think the question itself is an impossible one.
so
Yes, I
Sławek,
agree. Yes.
Sławek, do you want to respond?
About being Polish Jewish.
Are you a Polish Jew or a Jewish Pole?
It doesn't matter really. It depends who asks and from what perspective the question is coming from. I feel both, the same, like all of us, like Daniel and Lilka, we eat Polish food, we like Polish language, we like to be in Poland, we don't like certain things while we're in Poland, we hate anti-Semitism, but that doesn't change the fact that we feel both Polish and Jewish.
Understood. So I have a question here as who was the artist who did the dramatic drawings in the film?
Oh, David Friedman. David Friedman did paintings after, actually he did this in Lodz ghetto, but these paintings didn't survive. So he repainted them later on. And his daughter, Miriam, is curating his work. David Friedman, that's his name.
Okay, there are a number of other very detailed questions in the Q&A, and what I'd like us to do is to save them and then respond to those individuals with answers because our time is just about up. But before we sign off, I wanted to ask our panelists if there are any additional comments they wanted to make, either as such or to each other. Lilka, is there anything that you would like to add?
Well, I just want to say that I feel very fortunate, first of all, to be in all the panelists' company. Anybody here, everybody, has been a vital part of this effort. We know that ideas, a lot of people have ideas, and for me, it was just a thought. I thought that this would be a short story, and then I thought everything is visual. And now here I was today, the movie opened in over 30 venues. We have a panel today with the esteemed Daniel, who went to my school and also was born in Łódź like me. And also I want to thank here Paul, because Paul, although he's in the film, and yes, he was a friend of a friend, but I have to say without Paul, there will be no film. Paul, in a totally unwavering fashion, was on it from the first hour we met, in 2018, I presume it was in June. And Paul always supported the film and understood the needs of the film. And thank you, Paul. It was a pleasure working with you. And thank you again. You've surpassed yourself. And also to Sławek, I want to say, I wrote the story. The story was pretty much finished when I came to Sławek in terms of the general framework, but then I appreciate Sławek artistic visions. So, as any visions, we had our differences and then we agreed on stuff, but, the movie became a reality, and that's what I'm grateful for. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Daniel, for joining me.
If I can add my
please.
thank you notes. First of all, I would like to thank all of you and Lilka and Paul for being patient with me and finishing the film the way it is. But I need to say thank you to my wife, Barbara Grunberg, who was a producer of the film. And I didn't mention the name of the composer when Barbara, you asked me. Wojciech Lemański was the composer. Stefan Breiter was an author of this rephotography, special effects, which you see at the end of the film. And also, I want to mention Marcin Podolec, who did animation. So, and EC1 Łódź, which is the production company behind making this film. So all this thanks, and thank you again for inviting us for this webinar.
Absolutely. And if I may also thank two people who were so helpful in organizing the webinar, and that is Erin Polishuk and Shira Havron. Thank you both for your technical assistance in making this webinar happen. And thank you so much, Paul. I know that you were instrumental in supporting the film, and Daniel. It was really wonderful to have you as part of this panel as well.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for bringing us all together.
Can I say one? Can I say one thing for a moment?
Paul, please.
The film brought us all together, and what I really like about this webinar is the name Łódź or Lodz, whichever way you say it, to get that name out so that people understand the importance of this city, not just in Poland, but in the world. What that city really is.
More power to you. I couldn't agree more. Paul, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I would just like to say I feel very fortunate to be part of the film, and I want to thank everybody that was involved with. But I would like to send a message to everybody who's watching this. If you have not been to Poland yet, all right, and a lot of people are very apprehensive of doing it. It's a very emotional, powerful trip. I seriously encourage you to do so. You can read all the books, you can look at all the pictures you like, but when you actually go and see everything of what happened in Poland during World War II, I promise you, you will be a different person. You will put everything else in your life in perspective, and you may never complain about anything again after you come back. It's a very life-changing experience, and you will become extremely grounded by doing this.
I couldn't agree more, Paul. And I would add that you have to also come to Warsaw, and you have to visit Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews and discover the 1,000-year history of Polish Jews. And Łódź plays a very important role in that history. And there is a whole section of the exhibition dedicated to Łódź and its role in the industrialization of modern Poland. And so with that, I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank all of you who took the time to join us in today's conversation, and to wish all of you the greatest success with this marvelous film. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara.